Hi, everyone, and welcome to the second episode of Behind the Algorithm, where we explore the human and philosophical layers behind technology. From AI ethics to digital culture, we unpack the ideas, biases, and unintended consequences shaping our tech driven world. Joining us today is Patricia Amaro, here to discuss ethical AI. So, before we get into it, Patricia, would you like to briefly introduce yourself to the people listening?
Yes, of course, Greg. It's great to be here. Hi everyone. I am Patricia Amaro. I am Brazilian, but I've been living in Europe for since 2019. I have like 20 years working in the digital space, but in the last 15 in consumer goods companies like Unilever, Reckitt, and now I am a global e-commerce director in Mars. And because I've been like, when I look back, I realized that I was always this person, like kind of connecting emerging techs with business needs, often like with a sales perspective. So because I've always did this, um, I think 2 years ago I started to question to myself, what is the emerging technology? What comes next after e-commerce and the transformation of consumer goods companies? And then of course I came up with AI, and I decided to like study. I am pursuing a master on design for responsible AI because I wanted to understand not just about what is AI, but about how do we apply it in a way that leverages the way we live, the way we work. So that's where I am. Like, what is my passion at the moment is to understand not just AI, but emerging technologies. How can we really use it to help us as a society, as human beings, and therefore apply it in companies? So that's me.
Thank you. Super topical theme. Great to have you join us. So I do have a host of questions, but I read your blog post this week,
Yeah.
and so I'd love for you to tell me about ancestral wisdom and how we've lost it. I'd love for you to kick off with that because actually I think that does segue into how we live as a society and maybe how we're letting technology and AI take over some of the fundamental aspects of how we operate and organize ourselves.
Well, that's amazing because I think in the last, let's say, 1 year, I would say I am in the middle of creative chaos, because I started to have, like, at the moment that I opened the door to say, oh my God, like, there's something very important here. And like all ideas started to came, and I started to like study different topics, especially like two that seems to be opposite, but in my view they are not. So one is the emerging technologies, so AI and more futuristic, and the other is like how do we connect with our past and our ancestral wisdom. And why is that? This comes from I would say a personal journey, right? So a couple of years ago I had burned out. So I had like a very successful career, I had a good salary, everything was like check, and I was like unhappy. So I started to wonder why was this happen to me? And I realized because there were some human elements, like how I was like relating with people, the kind of relationships that I had at the moment that was missing, right? So I realized that, oh my God, we are human beings, so we need to go back to this organic. And I started kind of trying to track back, where did we get wrong? Right? So why do we have so many people sick? Why do we have like epidemic of mental health, and now according to South by Southwest, like social health? So why do we have this? So when I started to ask about why do we have this, and I started to trying to go back, to say, what did ancestral people knew, and what was the difference from the way they saw the life planet, and how do they relate with life and the planet different from us. So that was, like, I would say, the starting point of trying to find the answers to the problems of today in the past. That's what I believe. Because if you look at AI today, this AI is just like reflecting the problems of our societies, right? So we have bias offline, so of course we have bias reflected in AI. So the majority of problems that we see reflected in technology, they are just really just a reflection of our Western patriarchal mindset, right? So I started to say, okay, are there other ways of looking to like is there other way of interacting and relating with our other human beings and the planet? So that's when I started studying like ancestral wisdom. I personally, because I'm Brazilian and I had a strong relation with Amazon, I started to study like indigenous people from Amazon. How did they like? How do they see like? How did they organize and what's their cosmovision? I expanded it to other ancestral indigenous people from other parts of the world, and that's cool because you see that there are a lot of similarities. And I also touched a bit about what nature can tell us, and I discovered a lot of things. So for example, my hypothesis, and this is a line of my study now, is what can we learn with nature slash indigenous and ancestral wisdom that could help us to design better AI solutions, right? For example, like if in the ancestral wisdom, it's more about diversity, right? It's more about diversity and flow rather than command and control, right? So when you design an AI system, for example, if you start by having a diversity approach, instead of building something to control something, or like you kind of include voices in the design of it, right? You include the voices of the communities, for example, if you are building a society, a solution for a specific community. So that's an interesting loop, like I believe that the answers to the problems that we have today, when we talk about the future, we see some risks and threats. I think the answers are in the past, and we should really learn about how these indigenous and ancestral cultures organized itself.
The interesting thing, and thank you for that. Thank you for explaining that, because that's what your master's is based on, right? That's
Yeah.
that's the whole kind of framing of your thesis for your master's. Um, Having worked in technology and within the marketing space, similarly, like you, not for consumer brands, but for the agencies supporting consumer brands, I've been running along a very similar path to you. And there's a concern that I have, similar to you, with how technology has changed human behavior. But it hasn't just changed how we act, it's actually changed us physiologically. So, obviously, there's a big debate at the moment about whether kids should be allowed phones in schools, because not just because of the content they consume, but the ability for them to be able to concentrate. So before children reach a certain age, obviously it's different for women, for girls, than it is for boys. Their brains mature at different ages, but there are parts of the brains, like the amygdala, which don't fully mature until 18 and 24 for boys and girls, girls and boys respectively. I think boys it's 24, girls it's 18, I think. But up until the point that they mature, those brains are susceptible to external influences. So if they're sitting on TikTok all day, they are going to be reducing their brain's ability to function properly. And that is sort of an inherent negative of technology on us. And putting that back to sort of the ancestral take is obviously we didn't have phones until what, 30
Yeah.
years ago, 25 years ago. And prior to even that point, we were probably behavior in schools was better for varying reasons, but as one of those factors is the ability for kids to be able to maintain their level of attention. And that is just one impact that phones or technology has had on our ability to just act like normal human beings. Anyway,
Yeah.
there's that line that we can go down, or there's the other line that we can go down, which is probably better suited to ethical AI, because it touches purely on the usage and building of these platforms and algorithms, which is the bias. And so You talk about AI being a reflection of the biases already inherent in society. So, what I think is really important, and something that large organizations don't often do because they're where they might start as charities, maybe end up as corporate businesses, like ChatGPT, for example. They start with this notion of wanting to do the best that they can in the world, and it's all very fluffy. But ultimately, it's profits that drive business, and it's profits that
Yeah.
drive business in a capitalist economy of which we live. So the question to you is, how can organizations build fair AI when the data is trained on and reflects historical inequalities and biases?
Yeah, well, I think it is super important. Like you've made like I think at least five important comments in this question, and like I personally, I've been thinking. It's important to say that I am in this journey, right? So for me, like I don't have any like close conclusion yet because I am in the process of reflecting all of this. But so I'll start with like commenting the first point, which is about like how does it impact us? Because I like when I think, of course, like I've been working in consumer goods for the last 15 years. So everything, like all my experience is about how do we how do we apply it? How do we do it in organizations, right? So it's applied to that. That's the space where I have experience and like voice to talk about it. But I understood that it's not about organizations or companies or like external, it's always about people, and it's always about the people who is there, how they are living, right? So you're like you started talking about how does it change us, impact us physically, and then you ended up talking about how do we do it properly, right? But I think they are deeply connected because like it's very difficult to drive any change if we don't go to the individual level, right? If we don't understand what's happening with the human beings. So I think to the first point, something that I like to think, and that's a lot of my where I am probably focusing my research is about how do we use the technology as a tool, but without like living apart, without forgetting that we are nature and we are organic, right? So that's the first point. So like when I started studying the indigenous people, it was I learned that, for example, they don't have a word to describe nature. You know it. They don't have a word to describe nature because they see them as nature, right? So there's no separation. So, and there's a writer, a Brazilian writer, she's called Eliane Brum. She's amazing, and she moved to the Amazon rainforest. She's from São Paulo, but she moved to the forest, and she talks about something. She says she calls it Amazonear-se. It means becoming Amazon, right? And she talks about how does people transform themselves when they are in the forest because they become this nature. And also she talks about the opposite. When you take people from the forest aside, what happens to them? So I think part of the journey, if we want to do AI properly, one part of the journey has to do with individuals. Like I like to think about something like reforesting ourselves. Like how can we like reconnect with this kind of organic piece of us? And yes, we can use technology. We are here using the technology. I love technology, right? So but how can we use it and at the same time like be aware that we are organic, so we need the sun, we need the nature. We cannot stay like full day just in virtual screens because that's the problem is not to have it, the problem is just doing that right and not compensating. So that's one. And it goes to like, and of course like when you understand this, like if we have like people more like more connected to their like source and to their nature, like it's easier to make the changes that we have to do, right? Because when we go to the corporate life, and probably you saw it as well, something that I learned a lot was that I like to say that people are somehow becoming zombies in the corporate world, because I started to realize that people didn't care, right? So you talked about something to people, and any level, it could be leadership or like any level of the organization, and it seems that they don't care. And I started to think about how can people don't care? It seems that there's no feeling anymore, there's no desire anymore. And I think after 15 years in consumer goods, I understand it's kind of needed to survive. Like the work environment is becoming so hard sometimes, and it can be so toxic sometimes
Mm.
that if you in order to survive, you need you kind of need to learn how to detach your soul from the work. It's like severance.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
but what happens is that after a while you kind of detach it totally from what is meaningful to you. And this is what, like, many organizations today, when you talk to people are just there, and they are just more like zombies, just like walking and trying to get food, but without having any meaning or any feeling. And this makes people sick, right? This is what lead people to burnout. So I think if we want to apply, if we want to design responsible AI or ethical AI or trusty trustworthy AI, like, we need to start by, like, reconnecting, reactivating, revitalizing people in the organization, so that we can say, okay, we need to do this. It's going to give us a lot of work, right? But we need to do. So the start is, I think, is like reconnecting with this kind of organic human being in all of us in the organizations. And then you start to, like, you need to understand, okay, this is important and we need to do because it matters, right? Because we cannot design solutions that is going to create harm. We need to map the risks and we need to mitigate the risks. It's not about not doing. And I think I always say this to people close to me. I said, I don't want to be the police in the internet. I'm not this profile.
Yeah.
I'm not this person. I was always the person saying, let's do it, let's try. I'm 100% in favor of innovation, in favor of evolution. So I think we need to embrace innovation, but I think we need to do it like being mindful of the harm that it can create, mapping the risks, and build artifacts to mitigate it, right? It's not about not doing, but it's about mitigating and managing the potential harm.
So much in there, right? So much. Everyone would agree that we should be mitigating harm. That's almost a given, but it seems so far from the minds of the move fast and break things tech bro entrepreneurs who want to get to scale as quick as possible. Um, we talked about ChatGPT earlier, and before the call started, we were talking about ChatGPT started as a charity. It said it would never launch to the open web, and they did. And within 5 days, got 1 million users. It is by far the fastest growing tech platform of all time, and it's set to exponentially increase over the next few years as AI becomes more ubiquitous within our lives. So we build these things. We build these things without knowing what the impact is and without having any test environment for it. We never knew that social media in its current guise would spread disinformation at the level that it does now. We never knew that it would have the ability to create coups or help support coups in dictator-led countries. But on the same side, on the flip side, that it would mobilize thousands of people to go and riot and try and burn down hotels with asylum seekers in it. So we've got, supporting a good cause on one side, and we've got inflaming tensions on the other. We never knew this because we had had nothing like it before. So it can be, I
Yeah.
think, really challenging for regulation to know when to come in. And anyone who's worked in the tech space knows that regulation always comes after the fact. It always slows up innovation. We live in a laissez-faire capitalist economy, so it always favors the innovation over the regulation. So it can be really challenging. And if you look at companies like, I mean, Facebook has got rid of all of its fact checkers. Twitter's got rid of all of its fact checkers. My good friend who set up the ethics committee for DeepMind, they disbanded it. So it's almost like big tech corporates are moving away from worrying about ethics and not even wanting to talk about it. But there's a few other things I want to touch on, which is this really interesting that Amazonians, and as soon as you said it, I got it. Amazonians don't have a word for nature. Why would they need to? Why would they need it?
Yeah.
Because we are nature. They are nature. We don't need a word for us because we are it. That is something which we as a society, as people, as a race, as a species, have completely lost sight of. We are completely detached from the original reality. The thing before we built houses and skyscrapers and technology, we've completely lost touch with our roots. And it made me think about Musk's Neuralink. So the idea of human and technological sort of the melding of such, right? Start with developing technology for I think it's for people who can't hear. I think the first ones launched for people who can't hear or who have brain diseases or brain disorders, who have or in comas, and then people listening probably know better than I, but brain implants to allow people to do things they couldn't do before. So people who've maybe busted areas of their body that then connecting computers or manufacturing technology to insert into the brain allows them to then take over. So do you think we could be moving into a space, and I love the fact that you're an ambassador for the notion of reharvesting, was that your word? Reforesting.
Reforesting.
I love that you're an ambassador for that. But actually, do you see the world moving to a space where we could become the Borg from Star Trek?
Well, that's, I mean, it's so difficult to answer this because, in a sense, yes. I mean, like as you said, I think technology can, in many ways, help to address a lot of the problems that we have. Like if you think about people who doesn't have a leg, for example, and they can walk again. So I think there are many benefits that we can say, well, it could be very interesting to be like a cyber human, right? So in some ways, I think yes, but I think we always have to think that we are living a quite scary moment, I think, because like when we talk about like innovation, any kind of innovation, it's always about who cares and what do they care about and who has the power to do something, right? So we could apply this to a small company, a big company, a government, right? So so we are, if you search for the start of the internet, if you remember this, like it was quite hippie, right? It was quite, oh, we are going to be decentralized, the power is going to be decentralized, everyone will have a voice, everyone could go, and we have like the Arabic Spring, like amazing, like people going to street and using their voices to change and to fight against the authoritarian
Yeah, exactly.
government. So of and but I think it's very important, and we learn that already. We always have to think and to ask ourselves what could go wrong, right? Because that's the key question when we want to be responsible. Like what could go wrong? Like how could this be used in a wrong way? And that's why we need regulation, because regulation is an artifact that can try to balance forces and try to balance power, right? But we cannot depend on regulation because regulation takes time, right? And regulation can take like 2 years to do something, right? And we've just seen, like in Europe, that they just are not going to address directly the big techs because of power. So I think in some way we will become cyberhumans, but I am usually optimistic because, like, so I am. This is part of the evolution. I think technology will be part of our life more and more, more and more, more and more. But I also think that being inspired in nature, like nature always finds a way to get the balance back, right? So if I told you about my story of like when I was maybe in the most successful moment in my life, my nature found a way of bringing me balance, right? Because I had burned out. So like I think so I am quite an optimist. I think that we are at the moment like living a kind of a crisis, because if you make this experiment, like talk to people like individually, and you will see that, let's say, 90% of people is unhappy and is not comfortable with their situation, right? Because this kind of the overwhelming informations, like highly connected all the time, like working more hours, pressure at work, pressure personally, like we are getting to a point that we just can't cope,
Yeah.
right? So we need, and when we get to this point of I can't cope, I can't, when you reach this point, you usually go back to the nature, meditation, to your family. You go back to, like, let's say, this kind of human beings, nature, organic needs. No one, when they are like in a crisis, they go to organic needs. Like you go to your loved one, you go to some kind of nature or space, you rest, you sleep, you eat, right? So I believe that, yes, if we look from the technology, this is like it's going to be super scary, but I think nature always find a ways of balance, and I think we are nature. So I believe in this kind of human and collective power of not accepting it, right? And pushing it to the other side. I think that's what, look, we are having this conversation, right? And as I am, a lot of people is like going to connect with ancestral wisdom, trying to find, answers, and trying to understand, oh my God, how can I be better? Like, so I think there's this kind of balance. From one side, technology, if not correct or properly managed, go into a bad way, but still with a lot of positive outcomes. The point is the balance. The point is, okay, how do we mitigate the potential harms? Great, if we can. I saw it that now it's more popular, the ship that can control Parkinson. Great, like this is great. Let's do it. How do we how can we put guardrails that this could not be used in a more harmful way? I think that's the point. And the only way of doing this, I think there are two ways of doing, right? One is by like collective awareness, like individual awareness. If you have people who are asking me, like every time, like in the company I work now, like people are asking about it. It was just a quick story that it was interesting. Like I was invited to talk about responsible AI in an event. There will be like 50 VPs, DCOM, VPs of DCOM from big consumer goods companies. And the guy who invited me, a friend of mine, he said, why don't you come and share what you are studying? And I said, do you know that I'm studying responsible AI, right? Do you know that I am like talking about how do we do it responsibly, right? How do we build trustworthy solutions? And the first conversation we had with his team, someone said to me, well, I don't think this is a responsibility from business. I think this belongs to the CIO. And I say, I don't think so. I think it's from everyone, right? So I went to this event and I talked about So that's how I believe we need to do. So I started by literacy. So I started by, okay, let's explain what is AI, how does it work, how amazing it could be, and what could go wrong, right? That was as simple as that. Like 20 minutes, but let's say 10, 15 minutes talking about what it is and how amazing, 5 minutes talking about what could go wrong and how we could mitigate it, being business leaders, right? And the other people were mainly talking about the hype, right? Mainly talking about how amazing, how this is going to save your money, how this is going to solve all your problems. I was the only one saying, yes, it's great, but like, and at the end of the event, it was so interesting that someone, of course, people were much more interested in learning about how this can solve all my problems.
Yeah.
But someone at the end, he asked, he said, well, I want to ask something to this person, like a person who was talking about how this would solve the problems. And he said, yeah, you gave this example that we could cut 30% of our employees if we do it. Is it ethical? And then this guy who was making the question looked at me, and then he looked back to the guy and he said, is this ethical? We have 50 companies here. Is it really so simple to think about cutting 30% off? Should we do it? And for me, this was so clear. It was a clear sign of hope, because when he made this question, some others in the room started also to say, yeah, you know, there's this example of using a beauty company who use fake models to
Yeah.
advertising. Is it ethical in a world where teenagers are trying to look like their filters, the Instagram filters or TikTok filters? And is it ethical to use fake models created by AI? Shouldn't we talk about real beauty? And so it was interesting that I saw that, yes, it wasn't even talking about how AI is amazing. And most of the people were like worried, wanting to learn more about how to get the benefits of it. And this, everyone's suffering a lot of short term pressure. But at the end, I would say at least 30% was like raising voices about, yeah, it's not so simple. We should be ethical about it. So I think it's about like bringing this to the conversation more often. There will be people who will be uh, keen to help.
I think you raised some really interesting points. I will touch on the ethical staff cutting piece in a second. Um, but going back a step to my friend, my very good friend, is writing a book. We do talks together, and when she talks about technology, um, she talks about how it has capitalized our attention because there is not enough love in the world. And she's currently writing a book. And she is an ambassador like you for us getting back to nature, us getting back to ourselves. She has worked in technology for many, many years. She's very senior at some of the biggest companies in the world. And she is currently writing a book, the treatment of which ends with, we need more love in the world. And the publishers that she has sent it to has come back, and this has happened on stage as well, have come back to her and said, we need something more tangible than love as a finishing kind of statement. The struggle with that and putting that back on to the ethical side of it is that when business is looking at AI, they're not necessarily always looking at the ethical impacts. They're looking at how it impacts their bottom line. So they're not looking for the love. They're not looking for how it's going to support their staff. They're looking for how it's going to cut their costs. And there isn't a simple answer to this. It's very difficult, I think, for publishers in her case to see how just saying something as reductive as love is going to solve the world. But it hints at a much bigger problem that you're touching on as well. We have lost touch with what it is to be human. I mean, you talk about people walking around the water cooler completely devoid of their soul. And you kind of have to do that to an extent in big corporates anyway, but more so now because everything is decision making has been taken away from you. Decision making has been taken away from you. Automation is happening. Everything's happening without your personal input. So, to that point, this touches on really what you finished with. Which is, do companies really care about ethics? Do they care about ethics? The individuals of certain or departmental heads might care about ethics, but do companies care about ethics? Especially when, and I'll just finish on this point, especially when we're in a time now where there is high levels of inflation, especially in the UK. There is a cost of living crisis. There's an energy crisis. There is a drive for shareholders, especially for big publicly listed companies, to drive profits, to increase margins. And we've already seen big corporates cut lots of jobs because they are implementing AI and transforming the business using automation processes. Do businesses really care about ethics?
Well,
Or is it just a case that they only care about ethics when regulation forces their hand? Sorry.
too much. So first, I need to know your friend. I totally resonate.
I'll introduce you.
Uh,
You already know her indirectly, but
uh,
I'll make sure that you guys connect. She's
yeah,
wonderful.
yeah. I have a friend who made a TED talk about AI and love. I will send you the link, and
Please
maybe I can
do.
connect.
Yeah,
Yeah,
please do. We'll get on to TED.
I yeah, I totally resonate because for me that's the answer, right? So I went to ancestral wisdom because I wanted to go back to organic nature of human beings, right? So that's it. I think so. When you were making I just took note because I want to make sure that I answer your question about if companies do care about ethics. But I think there are some, like when you were talking about the like the example of your friend with a book, something that I learned, like I've been in consumer goods companies in the last 15 years and always talking about new products. So I built the first EB2B platform owned by a consumer goods in 2016, right? I started working in 2015. And even today, companies don't get it, right? Few companies get it. So I learned that, like many times, something that was obvious to me wasn't to anybody, to others, not to everybody, right? So I think what happens sometimes with people, like there are more like that some people have the ability to kind of jump and say, okay, that's the problem. Like your friend, oh, the problem is we don't have too much love, right? Like I say, the problem is that we are becoming zombies. We are disconnecting from our source, our organic source, right? So for you, for me, for your friend, this is quite obvious and this is quite answers everything, right? But but not to everybody because people are in different places, right? So I always use this kind of illustration that applies to innovation but applies to this. So imagine that you are like you are on the seaside, right? And you were talking about, and you can see the other side. You can see that is not a seaside, it's a river, right? And then you need to talk to people that you need to build a bridge to get there, right? But the problem is that if people don't realize this is a river, like they don't build a bridge because they don't see the other side. So you need to, instead of talking to them about building a bridge to cross the river, you need to talk about putting the first piece of wood. Just that. Because you take people with you until piece by piece of wood by piece of wood until the moment that they can see the other side. And then you can talk about the river, right? So that's the innovation journey that I learned, how to how to convince leadership, how to convince people to talk about something they cannot see. So I think what I mean is you need to meet people where they are, right? So yes, if you can, you can see what is the, let's say, the raw cause of everything, the root problem. You need to be aware of, yes, that's the problem, not too many love in the world, but where is everyone, right? So you need to meet people where they are and you need to translate it. So driving innovation, or by innovation I mean new ideas, means translating to something that they understand, right? So like I started studying a lot about words, because I realized that the words we use matter a lot, right? Like the example of nature. So to be able to translate, it's important, because if you are not able to translate the idea to something that I call like consumable idea, right? So maybe like it's okay, fine, I know it's like I cannot have this kind of ancestral wisdom conversation with, I don't do it all the time, right? I have to adapt my speech to the person that I'm talking to, because it's about translation, right? It's about how can I make, what is the piece of wood that I can put now that can bring people with me, because if I talk too far away from them, they don't get it, right? Because they, like, it's not that they are not smart, it's just they don't see it, it's out of there's no meaning, right? There's no meaning for them. So to your question, like, do companies care about ethics? I think there are two ways of looking at it. So first, I think there's no companies, there are people, right? First of all, like, there are human beings that are trying to do something, right? And yes, it is right that you may have, in some cases, you have leaders who care about ethics from a personal perspective, right? And will bring it to their daily work. And there are others that don't, right? So there's no, like, I don't think there is kind of, yes, companies care or not care, because it depends a lot on who is taking the decision and how much does this person cares about ethics. This is going to drive a lot. So I've worked in Unilever like for 10 years, the majority of it under Paul Pullman, and everybody saw what he did in terms of driving sustainability. It was his personal agenda, right? So I was in many like small meetings with him, like with 10 people, where he said, we have to prove to the world that it's possible, do good doing good, right? We have the responsibility to prove that we can make business by doing good. It wasn't the CEO of Unilever talking about it. It was Paul Pullman personally, right? So that's the number one element. Like, some leaders, some companies, or some leaders will, if they have someone who is personally more ethical, some others no. But the other thing but the thing that companies do care about is about people. They do care about consumers, they do care about brand reputation, they do care about like being accepted and being loved, having loved brands. So I think it's always about translating. So that's why I started talking to you about meet your audience where they are and translate it to something that has meaning to them. So that's what I learned. So I did a project like in EB2B that was, I wanted to do it, the first project that I did, the first and the second, like, I wanted to do it because I deeply wanted to help the fragmented retailer, like the small store, the family owner store. I wanted to help them to survive. Like, I wanted to help them to be able to buy products in a good price in a world where like big techs were like getting everything. So the reason why I wanted to do that was, fine, I want to do because it was meaningful to me. But I knew that this wasn't what the company wanted more, right? So I had to do something that was driving sales growth, reaching new stores, driving better profitability, because that was what the company wanted, right? So we need people who is able to do these translations, like, okay, fine, can we do something that drives this meaningful impact, and at the same time delivers what the companies want? Because I don't know any company that doesn't want to be ethical, right? But I do know some that don't care too much, right? So I think the point is, how can we do it that we still we still drive innovation, we still drive growth, but we don't need to create harm, So that's how I see it. It's about like finding, like, we need to understand who cares, what do they care about, and we need to be able to translate, like, to be like making this translation, making this connection between different interests. It's important. So I when I started in this journey, I started like connecting with a lot of activists, right? And I've been in this 15 years in contact with a lot of senior executives from big corporations. The problem is, if the problem is that sometimes the conversation is too polarized, so and there is no, we need to find a common ground. We need to find a common ground. So we need to say, okay, it's possible to drive innovation, being responsible, like being ethical. It is possible, right? But I think it's not like, it's finding a common ground. It's not being extreme in one side, neither the other. I don't know if I answered to you. I hope
Yeah,
so.
yeah, you absolutely did. So we need to platform and praise leaders with a heart who care about society over profits, and they do exist. I just finished. There's a small bookshelf behind me, and I was reading the founder of Patagonia's book.
Yeah,
Where's it gone? Yvon Chouinard. Hopefully,
yeah, it's in my.
French listeners, Canadian French listeners, I'm not butchering his name. But this book, and there are others like it. There are other leaders like it who have championed ethical and sustainable development of their businesses, of their products for decades. And they are one of few, right? Because although big corporates, of course, Nike do a lot of work in the space, Adidas do a lot of work in the space of ethical and sustainable
Yeah,
product creation, product development.
yeah,
We need to be platforming and promoting those guys over others that aren't, and linguistics. I'm fascinated by linguistics. It's really interesting. Obviously, you're Brazilian. You speak Portuguese. You moved to London. You are now living in Spain. So you've seen, and I'm sure that you've been around, obviously, lots of other cultures and lots of other people that speak lots of different languages. The point I'm trying to say is that you've had experience of being and living in those different cultures. People communicate in different ways depending on how they speak. So people in different cultures communicate differently depending on how they speak, depending on the words that they use. And that's why linguistics is so hugely important. More so because if we can't articulate a subject, we can't discuss it. So I think that's what we're trying to do with this podcast is we're
yeah,
trying to create a platform for people to build that language, for people to be able to allow listeners to articulate their feelings and then discuss some of the biggest challenges that our society faces at the moment. And I love your analogy about building a bridge, one plank at a time. Again, I'd align that with what we're trying to do here. We're trying to make change,
yeah,
hopefully, by bringing people like yourself, like Stephanie on the podcast, who are ambassadors for positive change, to moving forward with technology in a sustainable fashion of which supports us as humans and doesn't make us work so hard we get burnt out. Because
yeah,
I think you touched on the fact that technology makes us very efficient, but actually we can only do so much in our time that we have available, and maybe it pushes us a little bit too hard to do things. And obviously we've become so detached from our sort of ancestral lives. We've lost that perspective. So it was a joy to have you on. We're going to finish it there. We would love to have you on again because there's so much that we didn't cover, didn't discuss. Finally, what's one thing that listeners should go and do now to get them back to their ancestral roots, do you think?
I no, it was amazing. We could let's definitely do other, because I could speak like 3 hours and listen to you. It's really, really amazing. I would say the, the starting point is be aware of be aware of your organic nature, right? So we are nature, so we need nature, and be aware of your positionality. And what I mean by that is be aware of your limitations to understand something and to communicate something. So that's why I started saying, oh, I'm from Brazil, I live here, I have a specific view of the world because of my story, right? It doesn't mean that this is the truth. No, because people could have totally different perspectives, right? And this can make the conversation really difficult if we are not aware. So I think, one, be aware that we are humans and we need this kind of human nature element to be fulfilled. And the second is be aware of you are just one perspective in the middle of the others. As much as you can, be aware of your limitations, because you are just one and you have meanings of words are different to me than is different to you, then it's different. So from people all over the world, this is so important. If you want to think responsibility ethically, you need to be aware of your positionality, right? You need to be aware that we are not in a space. I was in a class in my master with someone who is the founder of an NGO in Africa, who was working on the data labeling, right, in Africa. So very, very sad topic. But anyway, there was a moment where someone said, well, why don't we stop these companies? Why don't we stop why don't we why do we keep allowing these companies to hire people in Africa, paying low salaries in a very unhealthy way of working? And then he said, well, that's funny. If you ask them, they want it. They want a job. They just want the job to be healthier. They want to have mental support or doctors or whatever, but they need a job. So coming from Brazil, I know what it is, but the person was from Europe, right? So sometimes it's easy for us to think, oh, we want to be responsible, just cut this company, cut this job. Yeah, but sometimes that person doesn't have food, right? So when you think about positionality, you understand that, well, I don't know, I'm not from Africa, I don't know what they are living, and I'm not in a place of saying what is better for them, right? So these are the two things that I would say to start. Is one is be aware of our organic, try to connect with this human elements, go outside, go to a park, breathe, remember you are a human being and you are nature. And the second is be aware of your positionality, because sometimes with the best intentions we can be authoritarian with the best intentions, right? So that's it.
Patricia, this has been an absolute joy. Hopefully I'll get to see you in Barcelona soon, and until then, hopefully we'll get you on the podcast again as well. And good luck with the masters. And thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me. It was really a pleasure, and I think keep doing this because it's so important. It's so important to have conversations like this, and because it's about connecting people who are like-minded.
Yes.
So I really appreciate having this conversation, and hopefully it could also open new ideas to people.
Totally agree. For listeners, but also for people that come on the podcast, I can make introductions, and hopefully we can push this movement forward for people to get back to their organic roots and maybe put the phones down for a little while.
Yeah, hopefully.
All right. Take care, Patricia. Have a lovely day. All the best. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.